Hi, I'm Dr. John Bruno, and I'm one of the Autism EPSs. And this is the top 10 basic support strategies that we recommend for working with individuals, especially those on the autism spectrum. Number 10, use authentic questions. You want to avoid rhetorical questions that are not really a request. The problem with using a question that's really not a request is if you say something like, would you please sit down? No. Or how about we get back to work? Nah. Can I see that? I don't think so. So what's the big deal? The big deal is that if you are using authentic questions, then the students are able to answer them and you are in control. When you use a rhetorical question that is meant to not really have an answer and they answer it, then it looks like disrespect. Remember, these are concrete literal thinkers. And so if they've been taught that when asked a question, you answer it, they're going to answer it. The same token, if you're going to teach them that you don't always answer some of my questions, then the rule may become that I don't have to answer your questions, or I can decide which questions to answer. And so the easier strategy is to make sure that if you're going to use a question, it's a real question. If it's a statement or a request, you're asking them to do something, then make it a statement. Number 9, be specific in your language. Use positively stated corrections. You want to state what to do instead of what not to do. Remember, our brain doesn't see not. So if I say, don't picture the pink elephant, I don't think you're going to be able to do it. The same token, if a student is running down the hall and you yell, stop running, and he starts hopping, he followed your instruction, but he's not doing what you asked, really. If really what you wanted was for him to walk, then positively stated correction would be walk. Here's the second thing. When you tell him what not to do, you're assuming he knows what to do. The question is, do our students always know what to do? Sometimes no. And so when we give them the positively stated correction of what to do, we are sure that they have the idea of what it is we're asking them to do. We're asking them to walk. We're asking them to talk quietly. We're asking them to keep their hands to themselves. All of these things give them an instruction of what we want. Secondly is it makes us think about what is it that I want them to be doing. Often we know what we don't want, but we don't always know the replacement behavior. And so once you get in the habit of using positively stated requests, it forces you to start thinking about what you want. And when you know what you want, you know what to teach. And that gets you better down the road to getting the behaviors that we're expecting. Number 8. Be consistent. Understanding that the student has a disability, they're trying to figure things out. And so they are looking for patterns. The more consistent we are with following through on either consequences or following consistently on that, if I've asked one student to do something and then there's a consequence and that applies to everybody, then very quickly students pick up on that you are a person who follows through. When you're inconsistent, well, she said raise her hand, but she took some call outs. So maybe she doesn't really mean it. And so then they're going to try calling out. Being consistent helps them clarify these are the expectations. And secondly, it supports them in knowing what it is that is the rule and the routine. And therefore, it helps them with their communication of understanding that this is what's expected and we follow through. Number 7, follow the basic rules of thumb. If you want behavior to continue, then we need a 4-to-1 reinforcement of the positive behavior. So in other words, the positive praise, I like the way, I noticed, all of these phrases let our students know when they're on track. Often when things are going well, we say nothing and we only speak up when things aren't going well. What the research tells us that is that when we use a 4-to-1 ratio of positives to requests, we get much better learning and more consistent follow through on behavior and classroom management. 4-to-1 is the minimal. 7-to-1 is optimal. So how do we get a 7-to-1? Think about reinforcing students who praise other students. When we start reinforcing other kids for saying, oh, I noticed this, or I noticed that, or hey, you got working right away. When other kids are praising, then it's not just you who's praising one of 5, 6, 7, 8 kids. Now it's 5, 6, 7, 8 kids that can offer praise to one, and the ratios go up. If you want behavior to continue, it needs to be reinforced. Behavior that's reinforced is what continues. So it can be a reinforcement system. You'll often find as you come into classrooms that we've got different external reinforcement systems, token systems with Velcro or pictures or earning of points or earning of things that count towards something else. So again, if you want a behavior to continue, the basic rule of thumb is a 4-to-1 ratio, and it needs to be reinforced. The closer we reinforce a behavior to when it happened, the more likely it is that students will understand that a behavior is connected to that reward. Now, if you want to get rid of a behavior, always have to think about replacing the behavior. Once we know what we're replacing, that's the one we pay attention to, and then we don't give attention to the one that we don't want. But we never start trying to eliminate a behavior until we know how to replace it. So we don't stop behaviors, we replace behaviors. That moves us into reinforcement versus consequences. We know that reinforcement increases behavior and reinforcement teaches new behavior. On the other hand, punishment and consequences will stop a behavior, but the problem is it doesn't teach a new behavior. So if you think about a little child and they're walking towards a light socket and you say, leave it, watch out, dangerous, and then you slap their hand, this is what you're probably going to see next. They're going to walk to the next socket right next to it and look at you and reach out to touch it, and you'll say, nope, and then you'd have to slap the hand again, and then they're going to walk. What's going on here? Consequences teach you not to do a behavior for that moment in that place. If consequences worked, then we should be seeing a reduction in behavior. Think about traffic tickets. Have they stopped your speeding? Likely not. However, I'll guarantee you slow down at that corner where you got the ticket every time. But what happened? It worked for a little while, and then you were running late and you were a little bit faster, and within about a week, you were right back to the speeding that you always did. So if consequences worked, it should have changed your behavior, but we know it doesn't. Reinforcement, on the other hand, we are likely to keep doing that behavior. Research shows us that it increases behavior and it teaches new behavior. So we're going to reinforce the behavior that we want. Next up is are some samples of those reinforcement systems you might see. So token systems, letting them gain pieces towards a preferred topic. All of these things are going to be usually already set up in your rooms. But again, these can be both token systems and also things like your verbals. Great job, but then being specific. I like the way, I noticed you did. I see that you did more than last time. All of those are specific praise, and if a student is enjoying that praise, we're going to see an increase in those behaviors. What do we know about effective reinforcement? Immediacy, again, that reinforcement needs to be delivered immediately or as soon as possible to the desired behavior to have maximum effectiveness. The size of the reinforcer needs to be adequate to what you're asking. You don't want it too large for what it is, but you also want it large enough for what you're asking. Reinforcers need to be contingent, so there has to be a connection between something that happens and then that reinforcement is delivered. It needs to be consistently delivered. In the beginning, we may deliver one reinforcer for every behavior just to get someone started on that connection, and then we'll fade it out to for every 3, 4, or 5. Then when you finish that, then you get the reinforcer. But what we don't want to do is keep giving reinforcers at a high rate, because over time, you get bored with the same thing. We call that satiation. You become satiated. On the other hand, we want to be careful that we're not giving it too far apart, because when it's deprivation, eventually they give up or they may not make the connection. Number 6, maintaining high expectations. When we speak in positive terms, when we reinforce the rules that have been created by our teachers and our staff and in our school, when we hold every child to those high expectations, we're more likely to see movement. However, The high expectations have to be matched with the right support. So asking you to do something that you're not able to do, no matter how high my expectation, it's not going to be possible. Giving you a support to get to that and being there with you and helping you get up to that expectation means that you're more likely to get it and you're not going to feel like it's hopeless. But at the same token, high expectations without support, if I don't have the skill, then I'm not going to be able to do it. And so we're always thinking about skill versus will. Have you demonstrated this skill in the past? Then I can likely look for you to increase that behavior. If you've never demonstrated that skill, I may have to teach you that skill before I start expecting you to get it. Regardless, we're going to have high expectations that we will get there. Just how much support you need and how long it will take is what we're going to be working with. Number 5, establish rules and routines. Our teachers should have rules posted in their classrooms, and those rules should be positively stated, saying what to do rather than what not to do. And routines are very important. Rules and routines provide our students with autism the predictability that they need. They're trying to figure out how to behave in a classroom, and when there are rules and routines, they can then use those as their guidelines to know what to do. Therefore, they relax. When there aren't rules, or the rules are not positively stated, or the rules are not posted, our individuals will keep trying to figure out the rules for themselves, and often they'll make their own rules. Routines. Think about your routines. Your morning routine. Did you do it? Hard to remember because it's a routine. We're in automatic mode when we're in routines. And so your morning routine allows you to be in an automatic mode where you're not thinking about if you did or didn't do your routine. Now, here's the question. What are you thinking about if you're not thinking about the routine? Well, the easy way to check that is what happens when that routine is disrupted. What happens when your morning routine is disrupted? I'm going to bet that your day doesn't feel quite right. You keep feeling like you're going to be surprised by something. You're not sure what's going to happen. You're worried that you're forgetting something. And so there's our clue. What does a routine allow us to do? For most of us, our morning routine is allowing us to plan ahead for our day. And when it gets disrupted, we didn't make the plans. We didn't set up our brain for what was coming. And so we keep worrying that we're going to forget something. For our students, routines do the same thing. When the routines of put the red folder in the red bin, come in every morning, unpack your bag, follow the unpacking routine, sit down, do the do now activity. When we have those routines, our brain is freed up to think about other things. When our guys are thinking about what are the rules and they don't know the routines, they create their own. And then they get very rigid because they're worried that they're going to do something wrong, just like your morning routine. So when we teach the rules, when we teach the routines, and we teach how to follow them, and we are very consistent with it, then that frees them up not to worry about these things, which means we've got someone who's less anxious. The general rule is that predictability lowers anxiety. When our friends on the spectrum can predict what's going to happen by seeing the rules, by learning the routines and seeing them, they relax. And when they relax, you have a more flexible student. Number 4 is the PREMAC principle. This is grandma's rule. It simply states that, that if we can add a preferred activity following a non-preferred activity, we're likely to get you to move it. So we simply pair up something that you like with something you dislike. So if we've got work time followed by a break time, or work time, maybe a writing task followed by time on a computer that you do like, we can say to you, hurry up and finish, and then your favorite thing is coming. And so what we're going to do is we're going to sandwich non-preferred activities between preferred activities, or at a minimum, be careful that we haven't stacked up 3 difficult subjects in a row before we get to something that's easier or light. And so a pre-macking a schedule would be moving the schedule around so that we think about the order of how we're teaching things or asking students to do things. When we can put something preferred right after something that we're going to ask you to do we know you're not going to like, we can say, hurry up and finish this, because if you have this first, then we can get to that. they can then understand that something better is coming, and as quickly as they get it done, the sooner they can get to the thing that they want. Encourage choice, because choice equals control. Think about all the things that frustrate you. They're related to control. When we feel out of control, we are frustrated. When we have choices, we have control and we feel like we're more in control. And so giving choices, offering choices, for some of our students, they have to learn how to make choices. And so just practicing with simple choices. You want to use the green marker or the red marker. Now you can control the choices, we call that limited choice, and there are times where you need to do that. We don't want to say, what do you want to write with today? And then they say blood, not going to be a good choice, right? So we're going to only give choices that are acceptable, but think about what are some possible choices. Do you want to sit on the bouncy chair or the regular chair? Do you want to stand or sit? If you can live with those are the kind of choices that make things very simple. Do you want to start with the worksheet or the coloring activity? You can offer those choices. Again, offering choice equals control. And this is one of our top 10 strategies. Some other ideas are things like, would you rather work alone or with someone else? We talked about stand or sit, pencil, pen, or marker. What chore do you want to do first? Whatever it is, only offer choices that you are prepared to honor. If it's not a real choice, don't offer it. That has got to be one of the most frustrating things, is when someone makes something sound like a choice, but there really wasn't a choice. Number 2, use contingency statements. These are when-thens and if-thens. We use a when-then when we want to say no. Instead of saying no, say when. Can I get on my device? You want to say no. Instead, you say when. When you finish your homework, then you can get on your device. Right? When we give a when instead of a no, it does a couple of things. First of all, if a student is waiting for a no and they're waiting to have their meltdown, their scream, they're shouting, and you don't say no, they're surprised by that. Number 2 is when you say when, what you've said is it's possible when you get what I need you to do done. More importantly is, as you get in the habit of saying when instead of no, it forces you to think about what would it take for you to allow it. If there is a way that you would allow it, like, well, when you do this, I'd be willing to let you have that, then now you're thinking in those terms. But if it's a no, that there's no way you're ever going to get that choice, then say no. No, that's not an option that we allow. No, that's not something that is expected for this situation. Using an if-then is a little bit different. An if-then we use when we need to deliver a contingency. When I need to tell you that if you keep this up, there's a consequence coming, then I want to use an if. For example, if you keep talking to me in that tone, then we'll have to end this conversation for now. If you can talk to me respectfully, then we can keep talking. If you can work and keep your chair on the floor, then you get to keep your chair. If you keep moving around in your chair, then you're going to lose the privilege of having the chair for a little while, and you're going to have to stand and work. Those are if-thens and when-thens. Remember, when you want to say no, say when. And finally, our number 1 strategy for you is to use visual supports. Visual, visual, visual. Again, we're going to remind you that our friends with autism tend to be thinking in pictures. And so visuals are what they need. Visuals, if you think in pictures, makes everything concrete. And so when we give you a visual, they have a concrete way of thinking about things. Why visuals? Well, one is they establish attention. You'll notice on the screen here is a 5-point scale. It allows a student us to get their attention when they're starting to lose control, and we can get their brain to look at something visual. It's concrete and it establishes attention. It also establishes that we're both looking at the same thing. So again, I've got you focused on something, so I know that you're talking about the same thing that I'm talking about. Visual supports can allow for choices. If the when-then chart is on on a visual, it allows them to then say, well, let's look at your chart and see what's possible. Provides structure. The visual gives them the structure they need to know what's coming, to know where they're at in a routine. For many of our students, you may tell me, They know their schedule. They don't need a visual. I know I've got money in the bank, but I like knowing that I can pull up my bank account anytime I want and see that visual. I don't need to look it up, but it's nice to know it's there, and it gives me comfort knowing it's there. For our students, having those visuals gives them comfort in knowing that they've got that support. So again, think about your life and visuals, your calendar, a to-do list, right? When we see signs that point us in the right direction when we're in a new place, all of those are visual supports that help us. And so again, for our individuals with autism, this is not something that's nice to have. This is something they need. And so Temple Grandin reminds us, I think in pictures, words are like a second language to me. I translate both spoken and written words into full color movies, complete with sound, which run like a VCR tape in my head. When somebody speaks to me, his words are instantly translated into pictures. Language-based thinkers often find this phenomenon difficult to understand. So again, Temple Grandin's going to remind us, if I don't see it, I don't hear it. If you found yourself repeating something for the third time, it's time for a visual. If you've had someone practice something and then they can't do it each time, ask your question, do you have a visual? Visual support is really our last step before independence. So if we're going to be prompting someone to learn to do something, if I'm giving a verbal prompt, for them to become independent means that they have to fade off of our verbal prompt. However, if I start by modeling it and then verbally pointing to a visual and then just pointing to the visual and then eventually just the visual, task analysis or list or activity sheet or routine or procedure, eventually that sheet can become the prompt and eventually they can be independent. And so if I don't see it, I don't hear it. Our number one rule is visuals, visuals, visuals. Other examples of visual supports can be calendars, rubrics, outlines for some of our higher functioning guys. The sweep away timer, using a timer is a very effective visual strategy for individuals on the spectrum. So again, our top 10 strategies: statements instead of questions, being specific, being consistent, following those rules of thumb of a when then and an if then, setting high expectations, establishing rules and routines, using the PREMAC principle, encouraging choice, using the contingency statements, and lastly, visuals. Hopefully that was helpful to you as you in your role as a paraprofessional. If you need any more help or questions about these things, feel free to, of course, reach out to your building people, your teacher. And if you want more support on these things, we are the EPS team. And here's some of our contact information.